I'm Bob at I Like to Make Stuff. Today we're going to replace this broken table and make it modern. This is a little table that my wife literally found on the side of the road. She just brought it home one day and we started using it next to our couch as an end table. And for that, it works great. The thing I really like about this table is that it's narrow and it goes right next to the side of the couch. It's not in the way, but if you need it to be bigger, then it has a leaf on each side. That leaf folds up and then there's a piece underneath it that rotates out to hold that in place. That way you get a slightly bigger table that you can have a couple of plates at in case you wanted to have a meal. But there's one big problem. So what I want to do today is take basically this exact same thing, the overall sizes, the shape, the function, all that stuff, and just update the look. Not necessarily so it's modern, but maybe a little bit more timeless. So the first thing is to take some measurements of this and then head to Fusion 360. We have an online course all about learning Fusion 360. We'll put a link to it if you want to check it out because I think it is really handy. But one of the things we cover in that course is about taking all the measurements you need to effectively model something. Now imagine that you wanted to describe this to someone else. Think of all the different things that you would have to be able to tell them to give them a mental picture of this. Those are all the measurements you have to take. So obviously you need the height, the width of the entire thing, but also you need the angle at which the legs are splayed, the distance between the top versus the distance in the bottom of the leg assemblies. All of those things need to be written down, and then you can head in to effectively model it. I got all those dimensions and brought them into Fusion 360 and put them into parameters. Now we cover all this stuff in the course. You should definitely check it out if you want to learn Fusion. But basically once you get all those numbers in there and then you use them to create your model, you can change the numbers and the model will update. So this is what I ended up with. Like I said, basically the same thing, even constructed pretty much the same way with a slightly different style. So from here, I can measure the individual pieces and go cut some wood. We're gonna have some plans available for this project that use 3/4 inch material, so you can just get it at your local home center. But I'm gonna be starting with a piece of rough sawn cherry. This is cherry that we got a long time ago, and I need to get this down to the 3/4 inch boards to make this thing. Luckily, we have a bits video all about milling your own lumber, and so if you wanna learn the process of getting this down to something usable, go check that out. And while you go watch that bits video, I'm gonna dimension this stuff down to 3/4 inch material. I did want to point out something. My bandsaw is frustrating when it comes to resawing. I've never had good luck getting that particular saw to resaw something well. So I ended up using the table saw. I took the thick board and ran it through, creating a slot on the top and the bottom, kind of worked toward the middle, and then took it to the bandsaw to cut out that final piece down in the center, and it worked out pretty well. So now I've got a whole bunch of these boards down to 3/4 inch, cut into some different lengths. So I'm gonna lay out the tabletop pieces first. We're gonna dowel those together and let them get glued up. And while they're drying, we can start working on the rest of it. I've got those top panels doweled and glued together, so while those are drying, I'm gonna start cutting out the other pieces. Now, to be honest, I have not planned ahead at all. I just have that Fusion model to work from, but I haven't really thought about joinery, how the pieces are actually gonna connect to each other, what's gonna hold it all together. So we're gonna make that up as we go along, and then the plans that will be available will be the final process, whatever I figure out going forward. So the next thing I'm going to do here is to work on the shape for the individual legs. I have to make 4 of the legs and they all need to be identical. And in my design, I've got one straight side and one slightly curved side. So I'm going to start with a piece of 1/4 inch MDF and make a template, get that all shaped like I like it, and then I can use that to make all 4 of the legs exactly the same. am gonna make the table a little bit taller, so I have to lift this to make it work. But you can see it's gonna sit about right there. It flares out a little bit more than the existing leg, but it's pretty close. Then I'll have this top section that connects them and then one down here. So now, just gotta make these out of cherry. These legs are pretty well sanded, kind of ready to go. So I've got them up against this top piece to represent the tabletop. And I've got them spaced, the outside edges, at 8 inches like I want them to be. So now I need to make this piece that goes in between here. I have this piece that I milled out that has a couple of really big knots in it. So I'm going to use the top and the bottom sections. So I think what I'm going to do is actually just lay this underneath all of these and then trace the shape that I need and cut it out. Seems pretty simple. Here's where we're at on the leg assembly. I really like the way this is turning out, and it's actually pretty fun to kind of make the pieces as I move ahead and just keep them all fit together nicely. Of course, I will have to copy all of these to be able to make the opposite side. But right now, I'm trying to get this one put together, and I like the layout. The fit is nice, but I think these two pieces are too thick. So on the table saw, I'm going to resaw them to be a little bit thinner, and then I'm going to use dowels to attach everything, just like I did the tops. So I'm going to go ahead and do all that, make the other one like this, and then we'll talk about the next steps. I started working on the outer shape of the leaf for each side of the table, and I started out with just a regular diagonal line, and then I don't think it's enough. So I started playing with some different geometry just so that there's more of like a faceted perimeter around the top of the table. And so once I got this side to kind of how I wanted it, I needed to copy that to the other side. I wanted to point this out. Super simple, it should be common sense, but I had never had to do this before. I needed to copy the same geometry on the other side of the table, so I just took a combination square, pushed it up to this line where that little corner is, and then flipped it over on the other side and made a mark. Then I came back and did the same thing from this direction, getting it right up to that same point here, then flipped it over on the other side and made that mark. So over here I ended up with this cross, and that just gives me the apex. Then I did a straight line from there to here and there to the other edge, and now I've got matching geometry. So I've got the tabletop profile cut out, and now I need to work on the details. The next thing I want to focus on is this little section right here. It's where these two pieces interact. Now, they have kind of a keyed shape to where they fit together, and I don't think that's actually important. I don't think it actually does anything, because really this fold is about where the hinge is underneath. We'll get to that later. But whether this is important or not, I still want to try to replicate it. So instead of doing a curvy piece, because I don't have the router bits that match this type of thing exactly, I'm just going to do a straight down part and then a 45-degree angle. And as long as I match that same cut between this and this piece, they should mate up in the same way. Now again, you can do that with a router. If you had two router bits that fit together, then it would make it really easy to just run the router down both sides. They would match up and be perfect. I don't really have a set of matching bits, so instead I'm just going to use the table saw with the blade set at 45 degrees, although honestly it doesn't really matter what degree it is as long as they match. I'm going to set it at 45, cut the 45s, and then go back and lop off the vertical piece, do that on both of them, and they should match up. So I cut down 3 of these pieces to act as stringers. We're going to have 1 across the top in between the leg assemblies, and then 2 across the bottom section, and these are also going to hold those little like fold out pieces. But I wanted to point out, I spent a lot of time sanding these to get them back to just looking like bare wood. Cherry has a tendency to burn really, really easily, especially on the table saw. So even the backs of these pieces, I still have a lot of sanding to do to get rid of that burn marks. But once you get it sanded, it looks really, really nice. So I think what I'm going to do is actually just continue on with the dowel method to connect all these pieces together. It's working great. It's nice and strong and they're hidden. So I'm just going to continue on and probably do the rest of this with dowels. I'm trying to figure out how to get these bottom stringers to be perpendicular or parallel to the top, depending on how you think of it. And so I'm using the square to come down off the top in a perpendicular line, and I'm just going to match it up with this corner right here. And so once I can get those 2 pieces to line up, then I will just draw a line like this. Then when I go to stack my piece on here, I just have to make sure that it lines up with that line, and that should make this perpendicular to the top surface. One of the other awesome things about dowels is that you can assemble the entire thing without glue just to see if it fits together. And so I've already got like a working thing here, and I can take it back apart and glue it whenever I'm ready. But at this point, the last thing I really need to figure out before cutting these little fold-out pieces is where to get the alignment between the dowel that needs to go in right here and up at the top. It's really, really close, and I have to make sure that I get these in line and I don't come too far out, because then it wouldn't work. All right, so I've got this level here, and I'm realizing that I'm just barely gonna make this work. So if I put this up against the top section here, like right here, it makes it so that the bottom of it, when it's level, just touches the outside. Now this is still gonna work because my pivot point needs to be inset here just a little bit. And that's gonna make it so it's just barely inset here on the bottom. But what happened was that I ended up trimming this top section of the table a little bit thinner than I needed to. And so if this had another 3/4 of an inch, I'd be perfectly fine. But for now, it's gonna be really close to poking through. One of the ways that I'm gonna try to combat this is, instead of using this thicker dowel, I've got a 1/4 inch. And so I'm gonna use this instead, and that'll help push the pivot point back a little bit from the outside edge. That'll help some. But to get started, we're actually gonna lay out the shape here, go ahead and cut these pieces out, and then I'll figure out the pivot points, and maybe I can use the piece itself to figure out how to line up those points between the top and the bottom. Now I've got both of these pieces cut, and one of them is going to have to be shortened just a little bit to fit in there. But my idea here is to fit this in between the top and the bottom. Then on the side, make a mark here and on the top piece where that pivot point will be. Get it fit, get it level, make those marks, then take everything apart and drill all the holes, and hopefully it'll fit together. So this pivot thing actually worked out really well. I learned something on the other one that I fixed on this one. You have to make sure, if you're measuring this in place, that you're getting this piece level this direction and this direction so that it can spin. If one of those is off, it'll end up rubbing on the tops as it goes around. This one, actually, I double checked that and it works out perfectly. So next up, one of the last things to do here is to get the hinges built onto the bottom of this so that these table pieces can be held in place. So that's gonna go about right there with hinges, and those hinges just need to overlap a little bit on one side. So the barrel needs to be back in a little bit towards the center of the table so that it can fold down. Unfortunately, I don't have the exact right hinge, the one that I would prefer for this job. They actually have something called a drop leaf hinge, which would be perfect here. And they also have some that are just a little bit offset. They have a shorter side with a longer side, and on that longer side, the holes are not close to the edge. And that's because this barrel should go underneath the tabletop. That way when it folds down, you wouldn't have an exposed hole that wasn't in use here. But all I have right now are these little strap hinges, and these will work perfectly fine. I wish they weren't this color, so in the future, if I can find some similar ones, black or bronze, I may replace them, but for now, I'm gonna go with these. So this thing actually worked out super well. I'm really excited about it, how it's looking right now, and it doesn't even have glue in it. The whole thing is still just being held together with the dowels. So I do have to go back and glue it all up and let that dry before I can put on finish. But I've also got one more thing I want to do to add a detail to this. So a lot of mid-century modern type stuff has a chamfer on the underside. That's something I've never actually done before, and I want to try it on this tabletop because I think it'll fit the style overall. So I'm going to come back with a router and add a small chamfer on the underside of this, leaving a little flat all the way around. I'm going to do that on the top and on these little wing pieces. So once I get that done, that will create some more burning marks, so I'll have more sanding to do. Then I'll have to glue up the whole thing, then put on finish, and it will be done. I'm extremely happy with how the table turned out for several reasons. The biggest one was that I learned a lot by taking something that was already functional, something that worked really well, but making it look better. I didn't have to worry about how to make it work. I just got to focus on the aesthetics. I'm also really happy to take a piece of rough sawn lumber and turn it into a finished piece of furniture. That's a really cool feeling, and I hope that if you're at all interested in that process and trying that out for yourself, that you give it a shot. We are going to have some plans available for this specific table, and it can be made out of stuff that you get from the store. You don't have to mill your own lumber. So go check out those plans, and if you make one of these, I would absolutely love to see it. We've also got tons of other types of projects that you may want to check out, and if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. We're going to have available for this project don't require this. They can use cut those individual leg pieces out of my cherry pieces. So next I need okay. We'll see you next time.